Ubisoft is their own worst enemy. A company that was once one of the biggest names in gaming is now teetering on the brink of destruction. For years, Ubisoft was known for pushing the boundaries of what was possible in gaming. Legendary franchises, revolutionary open-world games, all of it under the tutelage of 5 brothers, the Guillemot family. But their good fortune wouldn't last forever. One of the brothers, Yves Guillemot, would slowly drag the company into a downward spiral, putting out half-finished games and valuing investors over the players. What should have been a gaming dynasty has now become a twisted version of its former self. This is the downfall of Ubisoft and all the deadly decisions that are killing the company. Ubisoft was founded in 1986 in Saint-Mond, France by the Guillemot brothers, the youngest of whom would go on to be CEO. By the 90s, they had already found moderate success with games like Rayman, and in the 2000s, they really started to take off. Ubisoft created shooters like Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon and Splinter Cell, adventure games like Prince of Persia, and cult classics like Beyond Good and Evil. But by far, their greatest achievements were Far Cry, which revolutionized the FPS genre by taking place in an open world, and Assassin's Creed, which took that same open world concept and pushed it a step further. By the 2010s, Ubisoft was an unstoppable machine, putting out annual sequels to their most popular franchises and publishing games by the fistful. But their rate of production was not sustainable for the scale of the games they wanted to make. Every new game was bigger and more grand than the last one, but you can only promise to revolutionize open-world games so many times before you simply can't deliver on that promise anymore, which is exactly what happened. The year is 2013. Ubisoft was getting ready for its next big release, which they believed would once again revolutionize gaming. The project was called Watch Dogs. It was an open-world action-adventure game where you play as a hacker named Aiden Pierce. The idea was that you, using this neat little device, are able to hack into anything in the world around you, identify people, make their phones malfunction, listen in on police scanners, and alter traffic lights to cause car accidents. The concept was pretty cool on its own, but that was nothing compared to the tech demo that was shown at E3 2012. When this demo released, it felt like a quantum leap forward for video game. Ubisoft had created this open world playground that blew all of their previous titles out of the water. One of the draws of the game was its stealth gameplay. There was a heavy emphasis on remaining incognito, blending into the background to avoid unwanted attention. Unfortunately, not everyone has access to the kind of cybersecurity Aiden Pierce has in Watch Dogs, but thankfully, we've got the next best thing: Incogni. Entering your personal information online can be dangerous. The scary truth is that it can be collected, bought, and sold without your permission by shady organizations called data brokers. These brokers, whoever they are, can access your name, age, location, even your browser history and online shopping habits, and use that information for their own nefarious purposes. These can range from minor annoyances like spam mail and robocalls to legitimate crime, like using your information to commit bank fraud or training AI to mimic the voices of your friends and family. The problem is, there are tens of thousands of these broker databases out there, and it's impossible to know which ones your information might be stored on. Thankfully, there's a solution. Like your own personal detective, you can follow along in real time as Incogni scans broker databases from across the internet to find out who is holding your information hostage and watch the data get deleted. Sign up now to take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code ACTION60 at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/action60. After dropping this gameplay demo, the team at Ubisoft went dark for almost a full year. It's clear that they were building up to something and would likely show off more gameplay at E3 2013. To say people were excited was an understatement. Thankfully, all that waiting paid off. When we finally got our second look at Watch Dogs, we were shocked. The game looked like crap, at least compared to what we were shown originally. Let's take a moment to compare these two. In the E3 reveal, the character animations look stiff. The hacking looks like a cheap firecracker display, and the graphics are washed out, unpolished, and painfully average. They don't look like they're from the same decade, let alone the same game. It quickly became evident that fans had been served a vertical slice, a small, hyper-polished slice of a game filled with elaborate NPC set pieces, animations that don't appear in the real game, and graphics cranked to 11. Now, it's important to note that this wasn't something new. Tons of game developers did this to drum up hype for their games or to get a small demo out the door while the rest of the game was still under construction. But the scale to which Ubisoft did this with Watch Dogs was shocking. Coming out of the Watch Dogs fiasco, Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot went on record saying that the experience would fundamentally change the way Ubisoft approached trailers and new releases. He assured fans that Ubisoft would commit to making their games playable, and that the demos they showed at events like E3 would be representative of the final product. But that didn't really happen. At that same E3 2013 event, Ubisoft released another trailer for a new game that whipped people into a frenzy. The announcement for The Division promised one thing. Can you guess? It's gonna revolutionize gaming forever. Yeah, we've heard that one before. The Division was a tactical, co-op third-person shooter that was also supposed to be a PvP MMO. The trailer showcased this gritty cityscape with incredible ambiance and action set pieces straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. Much like Watch Dogs, after this demo, the game went back underground. It would be 3 years before the game finally released, and in those 3 years, something in the game fundamentally changed. While players were expecting this immersive, tactical game where you and your friends execute surgical strike missions and badass urban warfare, what they got was this weird kind of RPG, kind of not RPG game, filled with bullet sponge enemies and cookie-cutter missions. It felt like The Division was trying to be a Destiny clone, which released in 2014. The mission structures were similar, the small instance MMO vibe was similar, but above all else, the addition of grinding for gear felt the most similar, and the most out of place. It felt like whoever was in charge of The Division looked at Destiny and said, we need RPG progression in our game. After grinding through the game's base missions, players were faced with the reality that there was no endgame. Live service also meant that the game was chock full of unnecessary microtransactions. The DLCs were paywalled, cosmetic items were pretty expensive, and the game was originally slated to have in-game currency you could use to buy weapons and gear. Thankfully, that was scrapped due to fan pushback of it being pay to win, but this was clearly something Ubisoft wanted to implement. In fact, Ubisoft felt the need to include microtransactions in all of their games moving forward, starting with one of their mainline franchises, Assassin's Creed.
We are the first.
The RPGification of the Assassin's Creed series was an attempt to breathe some life into the stagnant franchise. With the critical failure of AC Unity and Syndicate, both of which were panned for being buggy and repetitive, Assassin's Creed underwent a makeover, with the first game being Assassin's Creed Origins. Thanks to whoever makes the decisions at Ubisoft, AC Origins featured a 6-tab store in a story-based single-player game, which people already paid $70 for. Cosmetics, XP boosts, supply packs, and even the option to reveal parts of the map, all available for a few dollars each. This news caused outrage at launch, and understandably so. Having XP boosts and crafting materials available for purchase means the developers likely made the game slower and more grindy on purpose to encourage players to spend money. Origin sequels, Odyssey and Valhalla, had more of the same, and despite the in-game store being fairly unintrusive, it still felt like there was content artificially excluded from the base game only to be resold back to the player, despite them already having spent $70 to $130 depending on which version of the game they bought. And the bad press continued. When developing Odyssey, the dev team wanted Cassandra, one of the two leads, to be the only option as a playable character. However, Ubisoft's chief creative officer, Sergei Haskot, told the devs that having a female lead wouldn't sell. So Ubisoft added Alexios, resulting in 2 characters. Once the reasoning behind the change made headlines, Ubisoft faced a ton of backlash with claims of pandering and sexism. The fans wanted to know, who's to blame for all of this? And all eyes turned to the CEO, Yves Guillemot. Now is a good time to mention that behind the scenes at Ubisoft, something was driving the Guillemot family absolutely insane and threatened to take Ubisoft away from them. Between 2015 and 2018, the French company Vivendi attempted a hostile takeover. Really quickly, some Finance 101. A hostile takeover is when you buy more and more stock in a company in an attempt to brute force your way into becoming a majority stakeholder. Under French law, once you purchase 30% of a company, you're legally obligated to make an offer to buy the company. In 2016, Vivendi used this exact strategy to buy the mobile game developer Gameloft. which was previously owned by the Guillemot family. Now, they were coming for Ubisoft itself. After months of Vivendi buying their stock and slowly approaching that 30% mark, Yves had to do something. He rallied his family, business partners, and other Canadian companies to help save Ubisoft by buying as many shares as possible. The Guillemot family managed to retain ownership of Ubisoft with help from esteemed organizations like Ontario Teachers, who purchased over 3 million shares. Eventually, Vivendi relented, selling off all the shares they had bought. However, Ubisoft now had a new stakeholder, a little-known investor called Tencent. After escaping Vivendi's hostile takeover, Yves Guillemot now had a new problem on his hands: tons of new investors. It was his job to keep them all happy, and to do so, Ubisoft needed to keep making money. Thankfully, Yves had a wonderful vision, one everyone was sure to love: blockchain gaming. Rather than just focusing on making more high-quality AAA games, as was Ubisoft's bread and butter, Yves decided that the blockchain would be the next major innovation. Under his leadership, Ubisoft became a founding member of the Blockchain Game Alliance, a group dedicated to promoting blockchain technology in gaming. Ubisoft didn't just want to explore the idea, they wanted to lead the charge. This led to the creation of Ubisoft Quartz, a platform dedicated to buying and selling cosmetics as blockchain assets, which would give players true ownership over their digital items. The response? Immediate backlash. Gamers saw it for what it was, a thinly veiled monetization scheme rather than something that would actually add to their gaming experience. The announcement trailer for Ubisoft Quartz was flooded with dislikes, and many players dismissed it as Ubisoft jumping on yet another trend no one wanted. But Ubisoft wasn't done. They didn't just want to add NFTs to their existing games, they wanted to create games utilizing blockchain technology. The company poured resources into multiple crypto gaming startups and even launched their own blockchain networking company. While other publishers cautiously backed away from NFTs after the crypto bubble collapsed, Ubisoft doubled down. Ubisoft quietly released an NFT game in 2024 to very muted reception. Still, Ubisoft could afford to take these kinds of risks. Their main franchises, Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, were selling tons and tons of copies. But behind the scenes, things were starting to fall apart. Several games were stuck in development hell. Allegations against high-ranking Ubisoft employees were coming out of the woodwork. And Yves, trying to fix the company and make things right, ended up doing the exact opposite and steering Ubisoft into a nosedive from which it would never pull out. The first problem came courtesy of one of Ubisoft's subsidiary studios. In 2011, Ubisoft acquired the free-to-play mobile game developer Ouliant, which was best known for its horse breeding simulator, Horse, that attracted more than 2 million monthly users. Not long after the acquisition by Ubisoft, Ouliant promoted a new CEO in 2014, a man by the name of Charlie Guillemot, aka Yves Guillemot's son. Obviously, coming fresh out of grad school and being promoted to the head of a studio owned by your father isn't gonna sit well with most of your coworkers, but nepotism aside, it seemed Charlie did a fine job heading up the studio. Wanting to take advantage of the mobile games market, in 2018, Ouliant was tasked with creating a mobile action RPG called Tom Clancy's Elite Squad. It seemed like it would be a guaranteed hit. The only way they could mess it up is if they did something stupid. And then they did something stupid. In 2020, the team released a cinematic trailer for the game. In it, the bad guys were revealed to be an organization called Umbra, a terrorist group who hijack protests and civil unrest to further their agenda for world domination. Pretty standard stuff, except for one thing: the organization's logo was a raised fist, which looked identical to the one used by the Black Lives Matter movement, which was in full swing when this trailer released. Ubisoft was basically calling the BLM protesters terrorists. Not only that, they were the main enemy in the game, so you, the player, get to be a military enforcer shooting at human rights activists. Needless to say, the backlash was immense. Ubisoft immediately issued an apology, removing all raised fist iconography from the game, but this snafu was just the start of a wave of bad press for Ubisoft. In the following months, news would break surrounding a slew of internal controversies that reached to the highest levels of the company. Ashraf Ismail, the creative director for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, was fired over an extramarital relationship with the streamer he met in 2017. Maxime Belland, Tommy Francois, and Serge Hascoët, the company's editorial chief, were accused of verbal and physical abuse, particularly towards female employees. In response, Yves put out a statement assuring the public that Ubisoft was committed to creating a safe work environment and making good on inclusive practices. But others at the company felt that the situation wasn't handled well. The result was a mass exodus of veteran game developers. Among those leaving the company was Yanni Malat, head of Ubisoft Canada, whose role would be taken on by Yves personally, essentially giving him full control of the company. Whether the employees left due to low pay, a lack of faith in the company's creative direction, or just disgust over the growing pile of controversies, Ubisoft's once hardened team of veteran developers was quickly being replaced by greenhorns. For a few of Ubisoft's AAA titles, up to 50% of the development team was made up of employees working on a game for the first time. With so much turmoil and his newly found position of power, Yves decided it was time to shake things up. In a 2021 earnings call, Ubisoft CFO, Frédéric Duguay, made a strange statement. Ubisoft was officially stepping back from AAA games. Quote, "We are moving on from our prior comment regarding releasing 3 to 4 premium AAAs per year. Additionally, we are building our high-end free-to-play games to be trending towards AAA ambitions over the long term." For a company that once prided itself on large-scale, innovative games, this marked a significant turning point, focusing on free-to-play mobile games instead. Soon after this strategic pivot, Ubisoft announced mobile versions for its biggest franchises. Assassin's Creed, The Division, and Rainbow Six were the first games to go mobile. The company even partnered with Netflix to develop 3 exclusive mobile games, further reinforcing its commitment to the mobile market. Ubisoft also launched a new mobile app for their game store and launcher, Ubisoft Connect. Ubisoft Connect was the company's answer to Steam way back in 2009. Unfortunately, compared to Steam, Ubisoft Connect was a pile of junk. It's slow, it's buggy, every time you turn it on, 1,000 pop-ups explode all over your desktop. And despite years of users complaining about its unfriendly features and expressing their frustration at Ubisoft games being exclusively available through this terrible launcher, Ubisoft has continued pushing out features that absolutely no one asked for. This mobile app, which promised to enhance player experience with more services and social features, was just another half-baked idea from Yves hoping to copy trends from Xbox Live and PSN. However, unlike those platforms, no one was using Ubisoft Connect for its social features. So why did it need an app in the first place? Between blockchain investments, mobile gaming, and Ubisoft Connect, Ubisoft's direction under Yves was clear. Chase emerging trends, even if it means giving up what made the company great in the first place. 2024 was the worst year in Ubisoft's history. There were so many failed games, cancelled projects, and controversies that we can't even list them all in this video. The year started off with game director Philippe Tremblay going on record saying people should, quote, "get comfortable not owning their games." This comment was in reference to Ubisoft's increased focus on live service game subscriptions and was kind of an excuse for why Ubisoft had a reputation for releasing unfinished games. The sentiment didn't sit well with the gaming community. Baldur's Gate 3's publishing director called out Ubisoft for their focus on selling subscriptions to games rather than focusing on actually making the games. The crux of the argument wasn't against live service games per se, but rather Ubisoft's inability to put out a finished game on release day. Which brings us to Ubisoft's first major release of 2024, the self-proclaimed first quadruple-A game, Skull and Bones. When Ubisoft released Assassin's Creed Black Flag way back in 2012, it was clear that pirates were a moneymaker. Not one to let an opportunity slip away, Yves ordered Ubisoft to start work on another pirate game immediately and quickly. Unfortunately, that turned out to be not very quick at all. Development of the game that would eventually become Skull and Bones lasted more than 11 years. The game was initially given to Ubisoft Singapore, the team behind the excellent ship-based combat from AC Black Flag, but as development went on, the game went through countless iterations and identity crises. First, the game was supposed to be a sequel to AC Black Flag, which honestly would have been all they needed to make fans happy. But then they pivoted, deciding on a pirate MMO instead, which is pretty cool. I could see this working out for them, and I can't wait to see what— oh, hold on, we're pivoting again? To a 5v5 arena shooter, but with pirate ships? What the hell is this game? As the years progressed, different project leads were brought in who would tell the team to either start over from scratch or radically overhaul their vision, only to be replaced not long after by another project lead who would want to start over again. The revolving door of directionless management was expensive, and to keep the ship afloat, Ubisoft secured funding from the Singaporean government. In 2021, it finally seemed like the game was going to come out, and Ubisoft touted Skull and Bones as the first ever quadruple-A game. This was a big claim, but with 8 years in development and $120 million spent, this game had to be good, right? I mean, no other games that received countless delays and inscrutable hype ever failed to live up to expectations.
Well, maybe.
Plus, people were really excited to see what kind of game they decided to make after all those years under construction. Can you guess what they came up with? Drumroll please. An open world live service game. Who could have seen that coming? It took Ubisoft until 2024 to finally release, and within hours, it was being brutalized by the internet.
Skull and Bones isn't the things Ubisoft itself said it would be at various points in its storied development.
Skull and Bones, to me, doesn't feel like something worth $70 and a decade of waiting.
Holy shit, Flip. Do you see this menu? This is a quad A menu.
In comparison to what we would expect from a AAA game, let alone this ridiculous quadruple A label, Skull and Bones is a colossal failure.
The game, somehow, was a regression from AC Black Flag back in 2013. The character animations looked worse. The water looked worse. The really fun shipboarding mechanic from Black Flag was reduced to a freaking cutscene.
How is it possible that it went back this much? This is 11 years ago.
Even the naval combat, the thing that was supposed to be the backbone of the game, was clunkier and less fun than other pirate games on the market. The game was floundering. And as you'd expect, Ubisoft was ready to shut the project down. Except, the game's development was supported by the Singaporean government. And since they helped pay for a live service game, Skull and Bones was gonna keep sailing until their contract is fulfilled. But this was just the start of 2024. In May, Ubisoft broke records with the release of X-Defiant. The free-to-play first-person shooter had 1 million users within 2 hours of launch and 2 million within 48 hours. It was one of the best launch days in gaming history. Unfortunately, this is Ubisoft we're talking about. The game looked great, but under the surface, there really wasn't much there. Players would come and try it for a few hours, realize there was nothing special about it, and never pick the game up again. Still, despite the dwindling player count, X-Defiant's director assured fans that they intended to stay the course and keep the game alive.
12 seconds later.
Well, that was a lie. Alright, let's move on to the next failure. In 2021, Ubisoft was gifted a very special opportunity. Since 2013, no publisher other than Electronic Arts had been given access to the IP, so this was a big deal. Ubisoft knew that if any game had the potential to get things back on track, it would be this one. So they brought on Julian Garrity, the man responsible for The Division as creative director, writers from Far Cry 5 and Watch Dogs, and several other heavy hitters. All in all, the development for the game involved more than 11 studios and 600 people. To celebrate the momentous occasion, Ubisoft wanted to milk the Star Wars brand for all it was worth. So they announced 2 deluxe versions of the game, which would cost $110 and $130 respectively. These versions included vehicle cosmetics, early access to the game, a free season's pass, and access to a special mission featuring Jabba the Hutt. I don't know about you, but back in my day, spending $130 on a special edition of a video game would come with like a statue of the characters, a Master Chief helmet, night vision goggles, not just some digital bonus crap. And especially not a bonus level that was intentionally cut from the game and sold back to me? It's so shady. But things got worse when the game actually released. It was a buggy mess. The missions were frustrating, and the open world, which they were so excited to share, was more or less empty. When the game released on Steam, a little bit later in 2024, it peaked at 834 players. Sure, most players already bought the game in the Ubisoft store, but not even 1,000 concurrent players for a Star Wars game? What has the world come to? The end result was Ubisoft closing the studio that was responsible for the game in early 2025. Remember that comment about players getting comfortable not owning their games? Well, it came back to bite Ubisoft towards the end of 2024. Ubisoft made the decision to delist their 2014 open world racing game, The Crew, but Ubisoft took it a step further by preventing the game from being played at all, even by those who owned physical copies. This really didn't sit well with 2 fans of the game, and they filed a lawsuit against Ubisoft, which has yet to be settled. All of this is to say, in 2024, the company was in a really bad place. If you were a shareholder in Ubisoft, you might be a little bit concerned, and rightly so, because there was some seriously shady stuff happening behind closed doors. In 2022, Tencent purchased 49.9% of the shares in Guillemot Brothers Limited, suggesting that the two were getting pretty close. In mid-2024, a minority shareholder in Ubisoft, AJ Investment, published an open letter in which they accused the Guillemot family of conspiring against shareholders to take Ubisoft private and calling for Yves to step down as company CEO. This was followed by rumors of a buyout from Tencent, only furthering suspicions of collusion between the two parties. On top of this, all the failed games, costly ventures into the mobile and blockchain sphere, and countless other flops brought Ubisoft's share price down from 80 euros in 2021 to 13 euros in 2024. That's more than a 70% decline in just 3 years. Things could not be more dire, but thankfully, Ubisoft had a chance at redemption on the horizon. It was an Assassin's Creed game taking place in Japan, something fans had been asking for years, and it could be the saving grace Ubisoft and the Guillemot family had been hoping for. But leading up to the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows, things didn't go so smoothly. It would be an understatement to say that this has been a troubled project, as the game has faced what could be only described as a never-ending series of controversies, many of which Ubisoft brought upon themselves. When the cinematic trailer for this game came out, there were people arguing that it was a cool take on a niche part of Japanese history, but some were worried about the creative liberties the devs were taking when telling the story. Moving on from the fact that some people were a little bit upset about a black samurai, the game also had many historical inaccuracies, including Chinese architecture for one of its trailers, assets pulled from a Japanese reenactment group without their permission, and a number of other issues. Many on the internet expressed frustration with the game's depiction of feudal Japan, leading to the development team issuing an apology and saying the game is not intended to be a factual representation of history, but instead a quote, compelling historical fiction. Now, I get it. It is technically a historical fiction. This caveat is why games like Ninja Gaiden and Sekiro don't get lampooned for misrepresenting Japanese history. But Assassin's Creed is a franchise that famously prides itself on getting things right. The whole franchise is built on a reputation of being mostly historically accurate. Doing things like 3D scanning the interior of Notre Dame to get every brick correct, or following the layout of ancient Rome down to a T, Assassin's Creed games have a much higher bar than most other video games, and should be pretty strict with their representation of culture and historical accuracy. In their apology, Ubisoft did emphasize their collaboration with external consultants and historians, but quote, despite these sustained efforts, we acknowledge that some elements in our promotional materials have caused concern within the Japanese community. For this, we sincerely apologize. But that didn't stop them from collaborating with Pure Arts to create an Assassin's Creed Shadows statue featuring a one-legged torii gate. Many said this was offensive. Torii gates are found close to religious shrines all over Japan to indicate a boundary separating the human world and the sacred. The one-legged torii gate has a significant meaning of its own, but one of the most famous examples can be found at the Sano Shrine in Nagasaki, located 900 meters from the site of the atomic bomb drop. Needless to say, it's not the smartest thing to include on a toy, although it did get pulled from shelves. Still, there was still some hope that the game would do well, and if Ubisoft was going to get their win, it needed to come now. One more failed game, and it would be the end of Yves and his brothers at the helm of the company. But could Assassin's Creed Shadows do it? Did all the controversy turn people off of buying the game altogether? After numerous delays pushing the game's release into 2025, it finally released on March 20th. And the result was it did pretty well. It actually did well. Basically what we'd expect from a new Assassin's Creed game. The question is, was it enough to turn the tides for Ubisoft? Coming into 2025, here's what we know. Despite the success of AC Shadows, one of the studios that developed the game, Ubisoft Leamington, announced that they would be closing their doors on April 4th, which is not a good sign for Ubisoft. For the rest of the company, the shareholders are upset. Stock prices have dropped significantly and show no signs of recovering. At one point, Tencent wanted to buy the company, but under the stipulation that Yves Guillemot stepped down from his position as CEO. The Guillemot family said no, but Tencent has really wanted Ubisoft for many years, so they found a compromise. Ubisoft and Tencent would create a new company which would be in charge of Ubisoft's existing money-making IPs, Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, and Far Cry, as well as new IPs in the future. This company would have completely new management running the show, kicking up royalties to Ubisoft in exchange for their autonomy. 75% of the company will be owned by Ubisoft and 25% by Tencent. In addition, Tencent put up $1.25 billion as a cash injection with assurances of getting their money back in case things start going bad. But what does this mean for gamers? Well, New management will hopefully mean better games in the future. Ubisoft staff and shareholders have wanted the Guillemot family out for a while, so hopefully the company will have a new creative direction, which will be significantly better than it has been over the past few years. With this cash injection, Ubisoft has some runway to get their affairs in order. Hopefully they can restructure the company to be profitable in the future or risk folding completely. Regardless, we'll have to wait and see what decisions come next for Ubisoft and the Guillemot family.